So this is what the students are most anxious about in terms of how the exams are going to be and how are you going to pass the exam, how the results are going to be. So let's have a look. So when you're looking at the exam structure of FRM level 1 and 2, part 1 and part 2 as we call it. So basically you're going to be having a 4-hour exam on a single day. So you have one 4-hour exam for part 1 with 100 MCQs each and one 4-hour exams for part 2 with 80 MCQs in the exam. So there is only one exam each level which is of 4 hours duration and all are MCQs. There are 4 options with every MCQ and there is no negative marking. But when you're looking at the options, what happens is there is something called a distractor. So what happens is, suppose there is a question given and you have 4 options given. Obviously one of the options has to be the correct option. The other 3 options are not going to be random. So whatever silly mistake you make or whatever confusion you have, and with that, whatever wrong answer you can probably come up with, that will be one of the other 2 options or 3 options. That is known as a distractor. Very often you'll be able to eliminate a couple of options, but you end up getting confused between the 2 options. Therefore, the conceptual clarity required is very, very important. So there is something called distractor. So the options are not going to be random. So do not just get overconfident with respect to the no negative marking aspect. So the exams are very simple. Simple in the sense, not the questions I'm talking about. There is a 4-hour paper for FRM part 1. There is a 4-hour paper for FRM part 2. 100 MCQs in part 1, 80 MCQs in part 2. When you're looking at the exams are going to be computer-based testing format. Computer-based testing format means that you'll have to book an exam center. You cannot take the exam in your own house. You'll have to go to the exam center, take the exam over there, and of course there'll be CCTV coverage, etc. You'll have to book your exam slot and also you'll have a full window between which you can book the exam, maybe in the morning, afternoon, evening slot or something. And I think ideally it should start like 9 AM or 10 AM or something and it should end till 7 PM or something. Between that you'll be able to book I think it's not going to be exactly 4-hour slot, because at the beginning you have to put in your candidate name, etc. and sign a pledge that yes, I'm not going to cheat, I'm not going to divulge any exam information outside and all. You'll have a tutorial of the exam software. I also provide you a tutorial so that on the exam day, exactly how to attempt the exam paper, how to make sure you're managing time and being more accurate, etc. So all that is discussed in the how to use the exam software lecture. So there is a lecture, we have done that in order to exactly tell you how to attempt the exam and manage your time and everything. So time management is an issue with both the part 1 and part 2 exams. I'll explain that in detail later. So this is basically your exam structure, nothing complicated over here. And you sign your pledge, you do your tutorial, you take your 4-hour exam. There could be a little bit of survey or something at the end maybe. So it will be taking you approximately 4.5 hours or so. Between this 4-hour time frame, ideally you're not supposed to be going to get any break or anything as such. There is no division of part 1 as in first session, second session or something like that. But if you want a bathroom break or something, I think they will allow you to do that. But other than that, of course, there is no break, and that break is going to be a part of your 4 hours. So you will be losing time if you have to visit the toilet. Next, when you're looking at the part 1 and part 2 exams, the difficulty level, if I look at with respect to the exam, I would say it is going to be high. You are going to be getting a mix of questions in terms of simple questions or easy questions. You'll have certain straightforward, good standard questions. You will have certain difficult questions and maybe a few very difficult questions also. Normally, when we are looking at these professional exams and all, they're very structured in the sense that every single chapter is defined. Within a chapter, subheadings of the chapter is also defined. So I've discussed this in one other lecture, I believe, that every single chapter, let's say, will also give you the subheadings. And each subheading might have a half a page, 1 page worth of content and all. So subheading, say for example, if subheading tells you that you have to be able to calculate this, that means sums can come. Describe XYZ, that means only sums cannot come on XYZ. XYZ is only the concept is required. So it is very clearly defined. So normally we would not find any out of syllabus questions and all, but the questions are not going to be straightforward, define this, define that, state this, state that. The questions are going to be very, very conceptual. They'll apply your knowledge. You'll have to evaluate the answer and then make choose the correct option for the answer. And it is not going to be that every time the question is numerical. The questions could be non-numerical also, but the non-numerical questions are also going to be conceptual. So you have to have a very thorough understanding about the subject and all. Difficulty level, I would define it relatively on the higher side with part 1, which can be mitigated or which you can take care of by practicing very well. So there is a lot of practice that we are supposed to be doing in part 1. We are not supposed to be practicing at this level. You're supposed to be practicing at this level. So when you practice at this level, then managing the exam at this level is easy. For example, the Schweizer questions are going to be at this level. the practice questions provided could be at this level, and the exam level would be over here. If you do just the Schweizer practice, you'll not be able to tackle the exam. And the GARP Institute material questions level would also be comparable, somewhere close to the exam level questions only, maybe 20% plus or minus, depending on which question you're solving. So that is about that. And anyways, in the exam material and all those things, I've discussed all these portions in more detail as to what practice material is required and all of that. So that is there in the exam material and the required material required for exam and all that lecture. Part 2 exam, the difficulty level is also going to be, I think you will be used to it when you're doing part 1. The difference could be that part 1 is going to be relatively more numerical in nature as compared to part 2. So that way you can see the difficulty level change, or also because part 1 is going to be relatively new because you're learning subjects. Syllabus lecture covers all the syllabus and the chapters and all that we are teaching, but covering in the FRM exams. But with respect to that, FRM part 1 could be relatively new because for the first time you're going to be talking about terms like derivatives, put options, call options, asset securitization, bonds, yields, etc. But in part 2 what happens, these things are raw materials. These are like ABCD for you. Obviously these terms is basically like they are the basic terms that you already know, and in part 2 you move beyond, and the subjects in part 2 are totally different. So part 2 I would say that it is less numerical, you are more used to the terms and all. So therefore it seems to be more at par with part 1, but in terms of lengthiness of the curriculum, or at times, you know, you might find the curriculum a little less numerical is there, but a little less intuitive in some places. So that could be the reason for difficulty. But on an overall basis, if I would say part 1, part 2, you'll find it more or less at par with respect to the difficulty level. When I'm looking at time management, part 1 is going to be, I would say, a little bit of a problem, not too much of a problem, but yes, time management is an issue. So only you'll have to make sure that you have practiced very well, and there is a lecture we do how to attempt your exam. So how to use your exam software is also there, and how to attempt your exam is an exceptionally, that is the most important lecture I would say in the entire curriculum that I cover, because it tells you exactly your exam attempting strategy and all. Of course, there is no shortcuts and all I'm able to teach you. So I hope I'm not misconstruing anything or guiding you in that. So I don't give you shortcuts that this question will come, that question will come, this chapter is important, leave this chapter, leave that chapter. I don't do all of that, and there is no possibility to do that, and I'll be very dishonest as a teacher if I'm doing that. There are no shortcuts. It's just strategies in terms like, for example, we do trick sheet, mistake sheet, etc. I'll teach you all those things when you start studying in the how to study and practice lecture. When you start studying, so that your accuracy level is higher on the exam day, in which order to attempt your paper, or how to manage, how to attempt your paper in order to make sure that the accuracy level is higher, the time management is not a challenge. Those things, how to do your rough work on the exam day and all, those things I will discuss. There is no shortcut to exam or shortcut to studying or shortcut to learning. Right? So don't take it that way. So there is no shortcut that way. So time management could be a little bit of an issue, but I think it is going to be again similar to part 1 exams when you're looking at part 2 exams. The preparation time is also going to be decently high. Decently high, I wouldn't say decently high. How much time, when to register for the exam, I've covered in another lecture, so I'll not go about it. On an average, people take about 5, 6, 7 months or so for part 1 exams. Part 2 exams, I would say you need maybe a month or so, a little extra as compared to part 1. So I would say a little higher in this regard. But anyways, the when to begin preparation lecture covers this in detail, so I'm not going through that. Pass rate is going to be somewhere around 42 to 45% when I'm looking at part 1 exams, and it is going to be close to 50 to 52 or 54. I would rather be more conservative and take 52% over here. So it is going to be somewhere close to 50 to 54 only, or 55, somewhere between this. So when you're looking at the part 2 exams, but also understand that part 2 students, those who have taken and cleared part 1 exams, only they are taking part 2 exams. So please understand that if 100 students are taking an exam, 42 to 45 are going to pass part 1 exam. Out of those 42 to 45 are going to be taking part 2 exams, out of which 50 to 55 students are going to be passing the exam. There is no passing score as such provided by the institute that if you mark these many questions correctly, you are going to pass to the next level. So that is not provided by the institute. I'll show you how the results look like in all. In passing score, basically what happens is, like in school and college, we used to get that every subject you have to get, let's say, 50 plus, and on overall you have to get a 40% plus, or every subject has to be minimum 40 and overall percentage of the subjects has to be 50% plus or something. So we haven't been defined anything as such, but I'll give you the thumb rule or the basic idea about passing. The number of subjects is basically 4 over here and 6 over here. I'll just discuss that very quickly. So when you're looking at part 1 exam, there are 4 subjects. and 20% given weightage given to the first two subjects. So out of 100 questions, 20 and 20 questions from here, 30 and 30 from these two subjects. The details of the subjects and all is covered in the syllabus lecture. I'll not get into much of it. The basics, your foundation in terms of portfolio, quants, derivatives, fixed income, etc. is being built in this level 1. We use all the terminologies and everything we learned in level 1 in order to move towards level 2. In level 2, you have 6 subjects, but current issues is a very small subject as compared to. So when you're looking at the curriculum, this will have about 60-65 chapters or so. This has got about 100 chapters or so. So when you're looking at the curriculum, out of 80 questions, you'll get 16 over here, because these are percentages provided to you, the weightage of each subject defined for you. The exam is going to be having questions all jumbled up. So when you're looking at the exams, the questions are going to be all jumbled up. So you will not have like first all the questions from this chapter or this subject, then all the questions, then 20 questions from this subject. It's not going to be like that. The questions are going to be totally jumbled up, and you have lower weightage given to liquidity investment risk, that is 15%, current issues 10%. This is going to be discussed in detail in the syllabus lecture. The percentage is just to tell you that these are the exact number of questions per subject that is going to be tested. So out of total of 80 questions, you'll have 16 over here, and accordingly 18 to 15%, 12 and 8. So that is how you are going to be having the number of questions in your exam paper. The syllabus lecture is going to cover the subjects in detail. When you're looking at the exam term, May exam, the exams are held twice a year. The exam is going to be both the part 1, part 2 is going to take place in May and November or December. Right now we are seeing part 1 in May and part 2 in December, and let's see, most probably it's going to be part 1 and part 2 both in November onwards only. So May part 1 and part 2 both together, November November is part 1 and December is part 2. Now there is also an alternative where you can take both the exams together. So basically what happens is a student is allowed to take and register both for part 1 and part 2 in the same month of May. Suppose I book a slot, 20th May I have booked part 1 exam, 23rd May I have booked part 2 exam. You are allowed to take both the levels in the same exam window. That is a possibility. You can take both the levels together. My personal advice, although at the cost of sounding hypocritical, because I took both the levels on the same day. In fact, when I took my FRM part 1 and 2 exams, the exam would be not a computer based but a paper pen based exam, and I had taken both the papers on the same day. So 8 o'clock to 12 o'clock I had part 1 exam, then 2 hours break, 12 to 2, and then 2 o'clock to 6 o'clock I had part 2 exam. Now the thing is that when you're taking both the levels, so first of all my advice would be that you do the entire first class of part 1 exam and also do the syllabus lecture of part 2 exam at least, and go through the syllabus, understand the content in detail. Because what happens is, say suppose you took part 1 and part 2 exams both. If you did not pass part 1 exam, you will not even get the result of part 2 exam. It will not, the institute will not tell you whether you passed part 2 or did not pass part 2. It is not going to be informed to you also. So if you take both the part 1 and 2, either you pass both levels or you do not pass both levels. There is no condition where you pass part 2 and did not pass part 1. That is not possible. You will not even be informed that hypothetically, had you, based on the paper you've taken, whether you have passed part 2 exam or not. So you can take both the levels together, both the parts together, but if you do not pass part 1, you will not even be informed about your part 2 results. My advice, especially for working professionals, definitely not, even for students, because in order to retain the curriculum of both the levels together around the same 1 week's time frame, it is difficult. Earlier when you used to have part 1 and 2 on the same day, 8 to 12, 2 to 6, it was even more difficult. Now it has become better because you can register for part 1, let's say on one particular exam date, and part 2 with a gap of 7, 8, 10 days or so, and if November, December, maybe with a 2-week gap, so that you can at least revise part 2 in 2 weeks and then take the part 2 exam. But the risk is that if you do not clear part 1 or pass part 1, then part 2 results will not even get evaluated. So you will have to delve into, you will have to get into that understanding. You have to evaluate, do a self-evaluation in terms of whether you'll be able to retain that kind of content, and whether you want to take that kind of risk is going to be up to you. There is a detailed answer that I had provided, so you can just ping the coordinator and she will give you the detailed answer as to whether you should take part 1 and part 2 exams together or not. So that is the exam structure. Your exams take place in the month of May and November or December for part 1 and part 2 respectively. So the minimum time in which you can probably take the exam, clear the exam, would be, the shortest time would be that in the same month, So you can prepare for 3 months, 6 months, whatever you think you can prepare with and take the exam, or otherwise ideally I would say a 1 year period. So you prepare for part 1, take the part 1, you prepare for part 2 and take your part 2 exams. So 1 year. It could be 6 months also when you're preparing both the parts together, or maybe about 1 year time frame where you're taking one level at a time, and that's up to you. The scheduling window, now obviously as the exams are computer based testing and all, you will have a scheduling window where you can schedule your exam. You'll have a computer test center where you have to go and take the exam, and you can schedule the window in the sense that you can take a morning slot, afternoon slot or something. So you can book a 4-hour, 4.5 hour, 5-hour slot and take your 4 hours exam between that, and you'll have to check the test centers availability and all on the institute's portal when you're registering and schedule your exam. What timing to choose for scheduling the exam, there is a mentor note made for that. You can check that, ask the coordinator there in the app also, in your class app and study app. It's provided the answer as to how to choose and the exam center part. The kind of questions, part 1 is going to be, again, see, you cannot make a forecast. I've got nothing to do with the institute. I have no inside information. I have no connection with the institute whatsoever. But at times, the papers could be, even in part 1, the paper could be more theoretical in nature. Theoretical in the sense, non-numerical. Theoretical does not mean define this, define that, straightforward questions. Theoretical means non-numerical is what I'm talking about. And that gets even more difficult to answer because, you know, there is more confusion. If you have a sum, it becomes relatively easier to mark a correct answer and move forward because you can calculate and get the answer. In case of a non-numerical question, the question could become very confusing also at times. So that is why the conceptual clarity required is very, very important. In part 1, you have relatively more numerical questions as compared to part 2. And I told you a mix. You'll have a certain number of easy questions, good standard questions, good number of standard questions, good questions, difficult questions, a few, and very difficult questions, very few. So it's going to be a mix of, the difficulty level is going to be a mix of questions, and of course if you've practiced well, it is going to work very, very well in your case. Rough work and all I've explained in the how to attempt lecture as to how to do the rough work and all, because you have the computer screen in front of you and you're doing the rough work on sheets of paper. So you'll be provided A4 sheets of paper, ideally a bunch of papers and all, where you're writing, scribbling, doing all the rough work and all. And how to do the rough work and all, I'll tell you, so that, say for example, if a question you're attempting, a question, you've done half the calculation, but you're not able to solve the question, you want to get back to the question at the end, so you don't want to lose the rough work you've done. So how to manage all those things, these are the time management techniques and all we are going to be discussing in the how to attempt lecture. So how to do the rough work and all when because you're going to be working with the computer screen in front and you're going to be doing rough work on the paper because the exams are computer based, and exam software will not require you to use any Excel or anything of that sort. And for all the calculations, you don't need a Microsoft Excel or something. You'll be having a financial calculator that you're going to be carrying into the exam room. So that is not going to be a problem. So anyways, the exam software and how to use the exam software, we do it in the how to use the exam software lecture. Right. So this is something that students are very, very curious about as to how would your result look like. So first of all, the result is going to tell you whether you have passed or not. It is not going to tell you an overall percentile or an overall score or an overall marks that you have attained. So the first thing is you will get an information about whether you have passed or not passed the exam. There is no you passed with 90% marks, 80% marks and all that is not provided. Then on a subject-wise basis, understand, on an overall basis, you do not know your percentile. See, understand, when you're looking at the exam, if 42% people have passed, 42% is a pass rate, that means out of every 100 students at the exam, out of 100 students that have taken the exam, 42 students have passed. So on an overall basis, you have to be in the top 42 percentile, you have to be in the top 42 percentile, or you have to be in the top 42 people, students. Now, when you're looking at on a subject-wise basis, so that is the overall part. But institute does not tell you that what is your percentile on a overall basis. What the institute gives you is a breakup on each of the subject-wise basis. So with respect to, let's say, foundations of risk management, the first subject, this is a sample result of level 1 or part 1. Part 2 is also similar to this, same as this. So you are going to be given a category for every single subject. Basically, the idea is you are going to be provided a quartile for every single subject. If you are in this quartile, that means you are in the top 25 percentile students. So out of 100 students taking the exam, you are in the top 25 students for this particular subject. If you are in the third quartile, that indicates that out of 100 students taking the exam, you are in the 50 to 75 students category. It is not that you have scored between 50 to 75% marks. It is not that. It is if you arrange 100 students, if I arrange let's say 1000 students, and you are in this subject category in the fourth quartile, that is in the highest quartile, in the 76th to 100th percentile quartile, that means you are in the top 250 students if you have 1000 students. If you are in quartile 3, that means you are in the next 250 students, next 25 percentile students. If you are over here, that means you are in the 25 to 50th percentile students. After 50% students, your marks is below 50% students in the subject and above 25% students in the subject. And if you are in quartile 1, that tells you that you are in the bottom quartile, you are in the bottom 25% students. Your marks is less than 75% of the students. You have scored marks less than 75% of the given students. So over here, the result that I have got for one of the students, he's got the first quartile in all the subjects, as in the 76 to 100 percentile quartile. So you have demonstrated excellent understanding of the subject. Obviously, if you are in this quartile, you're in the top 25 percentile students, you've demonstrated an excellent understanding of the subject. I think the second one will be good, the other one will be below average, the other one will be poor as you move towards quartile 1. Part 2 result is also the same, it's just that the subject names are going to change. So you get a pass or a did not pass for the exam, as in your whether you've passed part 1 or not, part 2 or not, and on a subject wise basis you're being provided a quartile so that you're able to evaluate as to which subject went wrong. And over here you have to understand it is not about what is your accuracy level, it is not about what is your accuracy level, rather it is about how accurate you are in comparison to the other students. So out of 100 questions, if 90% students mark 8 questions correctly, even if you mark 7 questions correctly, you're going to be in the bottom quartile, in the 10 percentile quartile, in the 0 to 25 percentile quartile, because you are behind 90% students, because 90% students marked 8 questions correctly. That is the reason about easy questions and difficult questions. If on the exam date, the questions are very easy, everybody is going to be marking them correctly, as in more students will be marking them correctly. So in that case, you will need to be very accurate. You need to also mark more number of students questions correctly in order to be ahead of the students. So when your subjects are giving you quartiles, it is not about I got 25% marks or 50% marks or 75% marks. It's about I got more than 75% of students' marks. The marks I got is more than 75, what 75% students got, what 75% students scored. So it is a competitive exam, it is a professional exam, it is with respect to others. So easy questions, of course, if the questions are easy, then your strike rate becomes higher, because a lot of students are marking a more number of questions correctly. So you have to mark even more in order to get a good quartile. If the questions are difficult, strike rate of all the students are relatively on the lower side. In that case, even if you mark a little less number of questions correctly, you might be having a higher percentile. The results are going to be mailed generally 6 to 7 weeks after the exam window. So for example, if the May exam, I would be expecting it to be declared somewhere in the middle of, I would say, June 15th, close to June 15th or something. So it's generally going to be around 6 to 7 weeks post the exam window is when you'll be getting it on mail. So you get the results on mail. You can also get the results on the institute's portal a day later, but on the result date, you'll be getting it on mail. The institute, generally the timing kind of is offbeat when you're looking at the FRM exams. At times I've seen the exam results turn out in the morning, turn out in the afternoon or evening also. So that we'll have to see as and when the institute releases the scores and all. So as I told you, there is no minimum passing score the institute is providing to us, because institute from the very beginning cannot exactly evaluate as to what will be the percentile or what number of questions you have to mark correctly in order to get to a particular percentile, because your marks will depend on how the other candidates are performing. And again, understand the exams are quite expensive. So therefore, because if a retake of an exam is going to cost you more than $500, so therefore what happens is everybody is studying seriously and people do not take these exams casually. Like for example, a CAT entrance exam or something, I've seen students taking it casually, rather to maybe they sit just to get an experience so that next time they are going to come up better prepared and all. But in these kind of exams, that does not take place, because there is a lot of money involved when you're taking the exam. So everybody is going to be serious and studying hard, so you'll have to work hard as well. So minimum passing score or something is not given by the institute, that if you mark these many questions correctly or something, you will get through the exam or so. So that is not provided. Obviously, if there are more easy questions, then your strike rate or the number of questions you need to mark correctly goes up, and if the questions are difficult, it goes down. A thumb rule, a basic idea, ballpark figure would be that you mark 70-75% of the questions correctly, and you should be rather through with the exam. So if out of 100 questions I mark 70-75 questions correctly, or out of 80 questions for part 2, if I mark around 60-65 questions, 60 questions or so correctly, I would be in a good position to pass the exam. Now that 70 questions could become 75-77 if there are a lot of easy questions. It could go down to 65 questions plus if you mark correctly, you might pass if there are a lot of difficult questions. And also what happens is, at times I've seen if students say that, I'll suppose you get 0 out of one subject which has got, let's say, current issues. In part 2 you leave current issues because it has only 8 questions. You get 72 out of 80. In my assumption, again, I do not know the minimum passing score, the institute does not divulge that information. But in my opinion, you will not be able to pass. So suppose you got 72 out of 80 questions correct, 8 questions of current issue 0. Or in part 1, you got 80 out of 100 questions correct, and foundation of risk management you got 0. One subject 0, other subjects 100% marks. Let's say hypothetically, I don't think you will pass. You need to perform decently well in all the subjects. You can get a third quartile in one subject and first quartile in all the other subjects and pass. That is possible. Now your third quartile could also be when you're at 26th percentile or 49th percentile. Obviously, if you're at a 49th percentile, the probability of passing would be higher. What I'm trying to tell you is, try to be at least a 40 percentile in all the subjects, and as in 40 percentile mean you are behind 60 and above 40. But on an overall basis, you have to be at least above 60. If 40% is the pass rate, you have to be in the top 40% students. It's not that complicated. Try to be good, decent in all the subjects. Overall, you can't, that means there is no selective studying, there is no leaving a subject altogether. That you can't do. But on an overall basis, we want to be in the top 40-45 percentile students so that we pass. Because 45% is a pass rate, top 45% students out of 100 will pass. So therefore, I need to be in that in order to clear. And none of the subjects you're going to be leaving or you're going to be very bad at. You have to be good, decently good at all the subjects. So that is how we look at evaluate the result part. Tell me, comfortable? This is the exam structure, the results and all, nothing too complicated, nothing too difficult to worry about. The questions and all, even if they're difficult, and pass rate is there, so you have to understand. Till we were in school, till class 10 or 12 or 11 or 12 and all, out of 40 students, let's say 39 students in a class would pass. But now in professional exams, out of 100 students, 40 students will pass. I've seen students take a lot of pressure in the sense that what will people say. So first of all, if people are educated enough to understand what professional exams are, they are not going to be saying anything. If they say, then that is their problem. Second of all, because now it's not out of 100 students, every 100 will pass in a school, in a classroom. But here, out of 100 students in the professional exams, 45 people will only pass. That is the pass rate of the professional exams. 55 students have to fail. So you will have to work hard and you'll have to be very prepared. You have to be very practical. I'm not saying that you're going to fail. Please don't take it otherwise. But this is a reality. Nobody can change that. Institute's pass rate is 45. Over the years, you can see it's 45, 48, 42, 44 and all when you're looking at part 1 exams. So you have to be very, very comfortable with that. You're understanding. And you have to work very hard because you have to be in the top 40 to 45 percentile people. So what you need to do is you need to practice, you need to work hard, you need to study. Conceptually, you have to be very, very clear. You have to focus. You dare not touch your phones when you're doing my lectures and all, because you will miss out on important points. You have to study for hours at a stretch. You can't take 20 breaks and all in 3 hours or 4 hours of classes. So these are the things that you'll have to work on, and then you'll obviously pass. So you'll have to work hard. So understand the entire structure and everything with respect to the results and the exam structure. Not that difficult. Work hard and you'll get through it. Right? Comfortable?